Howdy everybody, DW Verts here, Hickbilly Outdoors. I've come to realize doing these videos that you have to do some things in order, and I kind of got asked why I wasn't doing things in order. On my DW rig, my method of fishing a big plastic worm in deeper water and brush piles and such, so we're going to touch on that in just a second. We'll be right back. Hey y'all, I'm going to try to keep this short. I'm not very good at this. I talk too much. Try to get my point across. History. As far as I can recollect, it was the mid-late 80s. I'm going to guess 85, 86 probably more likely. I was trying to learn how to catch bedding bass, spawning bass, and I'd seen some of my heroes, Guido Hidman, Lake Ozarks. I watched him do some of it. Wasn't quite as much written about it as there is nowadays, and obviously not as much stuff on TV with tournament coverage and such. Our technique in that day, and it still works this day, was to throw a lure we called a fat gets it. It's now known as a tube. You don't ever hear it called a gets it anymore. Bobby Garland invented that thing. Tremendous bait, still to this day, from versatile bait. But that's what we threw for spawning fish, and we threw it on a real lightweight, little bitty slip sinker, Texas rig, open wire hook, whatever. And the trick was to put it in the nest and jiggle it, just jiggle it, and try to find that sweet spot and make a bass bite. We figured out real quick that every cast was different, and go on, that's a whole other situation I'm not near good enough to tell you all about. By the way, summer's back in Missouri. We had a pretty week. Smoking now, so if I'm wiping the sweats, because I need to be able to see what I'm doing. So anyway, fat gets it, nest and bass. But the thing is, you'd pitch that bait into that nest, or just past the nest. You'd work it up into trying to find that sweet spot, and the bass looking at you, you're looking at him, her, hopefully hers. You'd find that sweet spot, the fish would turn and mess with it, and so many times you couldn't keep it there because even though you're trying to shake it one spot, you're still bringing it towards you. I had an idea. Nobody showed me. I put a bass casting sinker. I think it was a 1/4 ounce. It wasn't real heavy. About this far below that tube, below that gets it. I thought it was pretty genius, and it worked. You could drag it into the nest, and that sinker would hold the bait in place. I'm talking about fishing 6, 8, 10 foot away would be pretty far, and I could just shake it. A lot of times bass and nests want something moving quick. I don't know, they want something jumping away from them. You could bounce it. Eventually it would work its way out, but I could leave it in the nest longer. If a fish spooked and swam away, or just like they do, I just leave the bait lay on the bottom. When they come back, it's a whole new experience for them, it seemed like. So I've got away from that because I don't fish for bedding fish very often. But that is my first experience with what would be considered a drop shot, right? It wasn't meant to be anything fundamental. It was meant to fix some of my ineptness at catching these fish. So anyway, the next experience that followed this was crappie fishing off of docks at Lake Ozarks in the wintertime. We had a bad winter. Golly, mid-90s. Water temperature 38 degrees. Crappie are biting, but they're biting soft. They're hard to make bite, but when they are biting, you get into them. If that makes sense, you could work out a good limit of big crappie. They were 25, 30 foot deep. And we found out that just throwing that normal inch and a half long plastic tube that the hell of a lure, it was made here in Missouri, it was another little gets it, little bitty tube, same thing, go figure. They liked a smaller one, and they made a smaller one. The hooks didn't fit. Anyway, what happened was, a buddy of mine, I was talking to him about the trout fisherman. He tied me up some trout flies, basically, with just marabou, with no hackle, or with just feathers, and tied them on little bitty, I think it was number 8 hooks, which usually I use a little bigger hook than that for crappie. But he tied me some white ones, some chartreuse ones, and my idea was a little bitty, I'm talking little bitty 1/2 inch long thing. The hook actually stung out as far as the marabou did. And what I did was, same thing, feeling those bites was tough, so I tied a bass casting sinker again, about a ½ ounce. I tied a chartreuse and a white, one of those jigs, flies about this far apart, and I don't know, maybe a foot and a half above that sinker. The very first drop, it went to the bottom like a rock. I picked it up into the top of the brush, started shaking it, and it goes thud. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't felt a bite like that in a month. And I was so surprised I didn't do anything, and it went thud again. I cranked up two 14-inch, 13, be honest, a 12 and a 13-inch crappie. They were good ones though. It was almost magic. The premise was there to get the weight below the bait so I could feel the baits. Get it? It wasn't about action, it was just so I could feel the super soft bites. They would thump it then. They were probably thumping it with the normal lead head. They probably were hitting the same way, but I wasn't feeling them. So there you go. Next step. We learned that bass were considerably deeper than what we thought here in Lake of the Ozarks in the summertime. I learned it in 1992. Fishing some night tournaments, catching them bass deeper than I ever would have thought. Matter of fact, I was told I wasn't catching them that deep. But guys, 40 foot deep, fairly regular in a hot summer, especially with all the boat traffic we have. Things push them down. Anyway, bottom line, you miss a lot of bites. You don't feel bites to start with. You miss a lot of fish. You lose control of the bass in those brush piles, blah, blah, blah. It's a, what they call low percentage, high profit thing, because some good bass live down there. So I think it was 93, I was thinking about that crappie thing, feeling those bites better, being in more control of the bait. Okay, being more in control of the bait with the tube and spawning fish, okay, and being more feeling the bait with those crappie. So smart me, I decided to do the same thing with a plastic worm. I took a bass casting sinker. Where do they come up with these names? Bass casting. Or the one I use now is called a bank sinker. Who does that? Anyway, come up with the same idea with my large plastic worm in deep brush piles from 20 foot or so to, I've caught them as deep on Lake of the Ozarks as 45. I know that's not much for you Table Rock guys, from you Clearwater guys, but the big worm in the brush piles, not many brush piles are any deeper than 40 feet. The 40 foot brush pile, first time I fished, was an accident. That brush pile had slipped off where they'd put it because the current and things we have in the boat traffic. Positioned on the edge of a bluff, and well, when that thing finally fell off that bluff to 80 foot of water, it was a sad day. Anyway, so that's it. That's why I came up with it. Is it considered a split shot? Whatever. This before split shot. Aaron Martins and those guys are so good at that split shot stuff, God bless them. I still don't care much for the split shot rig. It seems to me to be a small fish deal. I will do it if I need to. But anyway, so here is my rig. Pretty simple. A 10-inch plastic worm or a 12-inch on a 5 or 6 aught hook. That's, what is that, 18 inches? I'm guessing most time that's pretty, I don't ever measure, that's pretty close where I'm at. With a, oops, how's that for professional? With a, that's called a bank sinker. I think that's a ½ ounce. That's usually all you need. I can see going to a 3/4 ounce. I can see it. Fairly vertical over these deep brush piles. You drop the bait down, you never throw it very far. Although I've got a buddy of mine who's won thousands of dollars with this DW rig, throwing out and just dragging it back like a Carolina rig. The bait's staying above the bottom while the sinker's down here, and he's caught a lot of bass doing that with other baits besides big plastic worm, which just makes it a modified drop shot. The DW rig is all about a heavy weight, a big plastic worm, and brush piles with ledges. You drop it down, and what happens? The bait hits, the sinker hits the bottom, and you'll feel it, thud. And then you just jiggle the bait. Drag it through the next piece of brush, jiggle the bait. You're working the sinker through the brush less than the worm. You'll let the worm fall down all the way to the brush, pick it back up, but the bites you have in 20 to 40 foot of water are tremendously different than the bites you have with a Texas rig. You don't just pull up and it's heavy. Usually you can feel them load up on it. You'll feel the bite. Sometimes it's a thump, like that crappie deal. So that in itself is a big advantage. I throw a 10-inch worm on this rig probably 85% of the time. When I throw a 12-inch worm, I talked about this in my initial video, I like that hunker right there. That's the man's 12-inch straight tail, nothing fancy. Don't know why, it's a whole different look, but when you shake this thing, it does stuff that ribbon tail doesn't do. That's just a tremendous bait. So if I'm not going to throw, if a fish, especially when the fish are bigger fish or biting good, I'm going to throw that big old 12-inch Mans. Guys, that's it. It ain't complicated. I'm not saying I invented the drop shot. There's nothing new under the sun. Anything we do in life, and bass fishing just seems to be a regurgitation, a recycling regurgitation. We're throwing up efforts now. Recycling of old things and new things. Braided line, the original cotton line that we fished with in the 30s and 40s was just kind of a braid. It's nothing new. Oh, and by the way, I'm fishing this on braid. I don't care. I'm 30-pound braid. This is a heavy action rod. There's heavier rods than this, a heavy action, but it's pretty stiff. It's a Dobbins. It's a Fury, or it's a Sierra. 734, that's a heavy action. That's pretty much the rod. You need a little bit of tip to work a plastic worm and brush, or a jig even. A little bit of tip helps give. I would use a 735, which is a extra heavy, but the 4-action, which is a heavy in Dobbins, will work. I would never use less than medium heavy, and in 40 foot of water, 35, probably would never do that. I want some more stuff. The 7-foot 3-inch rod, again, 30-pound braid. Nobody's going to convince me that it doesn't work good enough for me. The stretch you get out of monofilament, and I don't know much about some of these new lines. But I'm just going to use braid. It works. The fish don't shy off from it. And you're not going to do this in dirty water. This is a clear water thing for them to be that deep. That's my deal. Try it. If one person out here would try that and give it a dedicated chance at some deeper brush piles, I think you'll be pretty thrilled. The whole feel of the bait, it's just totally different feel. And you can feel that sinker going thud, thud, thud. That's probably like a Carolina rig. It's probably attracting some fish, knocking scum off the limbs and stuff. And I said my buddy fishes on clean banks, clean points. He throws it out and jiggles it all the way back in out with the big worm. I never have done that. I probably ought to. Maybe I'm shorting myself. But that's the DW rig. I may never get famous from it, but by golly, I want to hear some of y'all tried it. It'll work into September when the fish finally start breaking up a little bit more shallow. Obviously, it goes away. It is a big fish bait, 3 pounds and up. Big fish meaning tournament quality fish. And I hope you guys like it. It's hot. I'm going to go do something else. I need to go to work. I'm Dale Verts. Be glad you're not, because talking about crap like this is hard to do, and I'm not very good at it. I apologize, but I'm going to keep on trying to throw some stuff out that works for people. You've been watching Hickbilly Outdoors. Go to ultimatebass.com. I tell you that every time. You look at the discussion forum, you'll see stuff about things like this. You'll find neat tricks and guys that aren't afraid to share. It's not like the old, zip-tied mouth, the old days. And I keep saying go to Randy Blockett's channel on YouTube, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. He's never done DW rig though. He's got some good stuff. Guys, thank y'all. God bless. We'll talk at you later.